On the Tangjiang continent, deep within the crying forbidden land, countless cultivators had gathered. Their eyes were fixed on a towering rock, where the protagonist stood tall and defiant. From below, a man shouted his name with hatred, accusing him of a lifetime of sins, bullying men and women, committing endless atrocities. A woman's furious voice soon followed. She accused him of deceiving her sister, causing her endless suffering that eventually led to her death. With blood in her eyes, she swore that on this day, she would tear his body into 1,000 pieces. Then, an old man stepped forward, declaring that after 3 years of chasing him across mountains and seas, the fugitive had finally reached the end of his path. Thunder cracked in the distance, and lightning struck the ground behind the protagonist as the elder roared that he would avenge his fallen disciple. Despite his blood-soaked sword dripping crimson onto the rock, the protagonist stood unshaken. His body was injured, but his gaze remained cold and fearless. Suddenly, a gentle yet commanding voice called his name. He turned to see a woman in white robes, her presence radiant yet stern. She was none other than the Crimson Dream Butterfly, Peak Master of Cloud Rosy Peak from the Tiso Sanctuary. With a piercing look, she asked him if he felt any regret now that he had fallen into such a desperate state. The protagonist let out a bitter laugh. He declared that in less than 100 years of cultivation, his life had been nothing but endless battles. He demanded to know, among all his peers, who else dared to call themselves invincible? Who else could claim to be undefeated? Yet, he admitted with a somber tone that time was ruthless, and even he carried regret. His words darkened as he added, if he had been granted another 1,000 years, no one in this world would have dared defy him. The Crimson Dream Butterfly's expression hardened. Since he refused to repent, she declared, then he should not blame them for being merciless. She raised her hand, commanding all cultivators to strike together and take his life. In response, the protagonist's eyes glimmered with madness. He raised his hand, releasing a terrifying dark aura that spread like a storm. A grin twisted across his face as he clenched his fist, condensing that power into a single point before him. The cultivators rushed from all sides, unleashing their fury. One among them suddenly recognized the technique he was preparing and shouted in alarm. It was his father's forbidden move. They had to stop him at once. But before they could, several cultivators rose high above, their spiritual energy bursting forth as 3 heavenly manifestations took form. Together, they unleashed their combined technique, 3,000 worlds. The 3 heavenly manifestations struck with unstoppable force. The protagonist raised his sword in defiance, trying to block their combined assault. Steel clashed with divine might, but the impact was too great. His body shook violently, blood spraying from his lips. Yet instead of fear, he laughed, a wild, unyielding laugh. Through the blood, he declared that for emperors, the greatest regret was failing to transcend mortality and seize eternal life. But for him? He carried no such regret. With a roar, he plunged his broken sword into the ground. His body began to fracture, cracks spreading like shattered glass, while the dark aura around him surged higher and higher. That aura erupted into a massive pillar of power, tearing through the battlefield. Its shockwaves hurled cultivators in every direction, forcing screams of agony as they were flung aside. When the violent energy finally dispersed, silence returned. The protagonist's shattered sword fell lifelessly to the ground. He had been defeated. All around, cultivators lay wounded. The woman who had sworn vengeance earlier let out a trembling cry, announcing that he had self-destructed. The old master, however, only sighed. With sorrow in his voice, he said that if the young man had once fought against demons and barbarians at the Tanwan Great Wall, he might have been remembered as a great general of the human race. The crowd turned to the horizon, where the setting sun glowed peacefully. They lamented his end, it was a pity. But while they believed he had perished, his consciousness lingered. A voice echoed faintly in his mind, refusing to accept such a fate. Could it truly be that he, the so-called demon, would simply vanish here? Far away, at the Tesho Holy Ground, home to 18 mighty spirit peaks, the world moved on. The leaders of Tangjing, Yunia, and Changjin peaks stood as great saints, while the remaining peaks were governed by lesser saints. 1 month later, at Yunia Spirit Peak, a streak of red aura shot through the sky and into a secluded residence. Inside, on a bed, the protagonist opened his eyes. A grin stretched across his face as he laughed softly. He was alive. Against all odds, he had returned. Sitting up, he recalled his former life, once an ordinary university student before his transmigration. But unlike anyone else, he had prepared for this very day. He whispered proudly that he had crafted 3,781 backup plans and 121 resurrection methods. With such meticulous preparation, how could death ever truly claim him? Rising to his feet, he looked around the unfamiliar room, realizing it belonged to the Tesho Holy Ground itself. A strange sense of fate hung in the air. Then, suddenly, a metallic voice rang out in his mind. A system notification appeared, detecting his resurrection. The system began updating its functions, presenting him with new choices. 2 roles unfolded before him, the destined villain, who would be rewarded for every evil deed, and the hidden villain, a darker path awakened by his brush with death. The The protagonist reflected on the pain he had endured and swore that this time, he would survive, by hiding in the shadows, changing his methods, and continuing down the path of evil without exposing himself too soon. As he looked at the new notifications from the system, he recalled how in his last life he had chosen the role of the destined villain, openly committing countless wicked deeds. It had felt thrilling at first, but everywhere he went, he was hunted and hated. That life was too exhausting. This time, a sly grin spread across his face. Instead of flaunting his power, he would remain hidden, quietly growing stronger until the time was right. Then, when no one expected it, he would unleash his strength upon the world. Wouldn't that be even better? He thought with amusement. In his imagination, he pictured himself lying on a soft bed, surrounded by beautiful women, basking in glory. If he could rise to the position of the Holy Sun, such a vision would no longer just be fantasy. Resolved, he chose the role of the hidden villain. The system immediately acknowledged his decision, announcing that the path had been selected and was now loading. Once the process was complete, the protagonist ordered the system to display his new profile. What he saw shocked him. According to the system, he had transmigrated into the body of a closed-door disciple of Unia Mountain, a young man with mediocre talent, dreadful luck, and power weaker than a chicken. His eyes widened in disbelief. What the hell was this guy even doing in such a place, he muttered. The system's memories then unfolded before him. Just 10 days earlier, this pawn of his had challenged a personal disciple of Tangjin Peak to a life-and-death duel. The reason? Jealousy over a woman's affection. The duel had ended in a single move, the pawn was defeated, humiliated, and had his cultivation crippled. The protagonist sighed with pity at such a pathetic fate. Closing his eyes, he began to meditate. His expression hardened as he muttered to himself, since this disciple was now his pawn, the boy's enemies would naturally become his enemies as well. If he had inherited this body, then he would forge it into the strongest weapon possible. An hour passed, yet his brows furrowed in frustration. The body truly was useless, no talent, severely injured, practically broken beyond repair. But instead of despairing, he smirked. All the better, he whispered. I already have a plan. Meanwhile, at Unia Peak, a group of cultivators had gathered outside. Their discussion carried through the mountain air. One of them asked if the rumors were true, that the mountain master had returned 3 days ago, after slaying the infamous demon Chu. Another voiced his doubt, wondering if such a figure could really be dead. A third cultivator chuckled darkly and replied, that so-called demon might have been invincible among his peers, but in the eyes of great saints? He was nothing more than an insect. Against dozens of saints, how could he ever hope to escape? Among the gathered cultivators, one of them sneered, saying it was a good thing that villains like Demon Chu had been wiped out. None of them realized that the very man they mocked was standing nearby, listening in. The protagonist's expression darkened, his eyes filled with cold fury. Under his breath, he muttered that they could never even imagine the truth, that not only was he alive, but he had also infiltrated their ranks. If he couldn't defeat them head-on, then he would outsmart them and grow stronger from within. The cultivators froze in surprise when they suddenly noticed him approaching. Startled, they quickly bowed their heads and addressed him respectfully as Senior Chu, asking if his injuries had healed. With a calm expression, he replied that he was fine. Without another word, he walked past them, his steps slow and deliberate, and headed toward the long stone staircase. As they watched him leave, one of the disciples frowned and thought, "Doesn't his name sound exactly like that of the demon Chu everyone talks about?" he whispered. Another immediately dismissed the suspicion, pointing out that if he truly had any connection to that demon, his cultivation wouldn't have been crippled so easily. A third agreed, saying it made sense. With that, their doubts faded. Meanwhile, the protagonist climbed the stairs until he reached a grand residence. Standing before the towering doors, he lowered his voice and called out respectfully, announcing that her disciple was requesting an audience. Inside the spacious chamber sat the Crimson Dream Butterfly herself. Her presence radiated authority as she looked at him coldly. "I heard you were injured in a duel 10 days ago," she said. "Since you've come here, do you want me to assist you with your cultivation?" The protagonist immediately dropped to one knee, bowing his head low, and addressed her with utmost respect, calling her master. But her response was harsh. She scolded him, saying that his cultivation was weak, yet he still provoked fights. Having his foundation destroyed was nothing more than what he deserved. She added bluntly that she would not help him and that he should leave. He lifted his head, his tone sharp as he pressed her further. Did she really not know why his cultivation was so poor? How was he supposed to become stronger without resources? He accused her of giving all the resources to his junior brothers while leaving him with nothing. How could he possibly rise under such conditions? Her hand slammed against the table, the sound echoing through the hall. Her eyes narrowed with anger as she shouted that his words were outrageous. She claimed he lacked talent, was lazy with his training, and now had the audacity to blame her. Ridiculous, she thundered. But instead of shrinking back, the protagonist only chuckled darkly. With a mocking smile, he asked if the true reason she denied him resources was simply because he bore the same name as that infamous demon Chu. The protagonist let out a low laugh, accusing the Crimson Dream Butterfly of venting her anger on him simply because of his name. "Isn't that hilarious?" he asked, his eyes flashing with mockery. Her gaze narrowed sharply. With a calm yet firm tone, she denied his accusation, saying she had never placed her rage on him. She told him to return and assured him that she would find medicine for his injuries so he could continue his cultivation properly. But he only smiled. Refusing her words, he leaned forward and declared that she could help him right now. Puzzled, she frowned and asked what he meant. His grin widened as he revealed what he had heard, that she possessed the rare heavenly fragrance constitution. He suggested that if she were to dual cultivate with him, not only would his wounds recover, but his aptitude would soar to new heights as well. Her eyes widened in disbelief. "What did you just say?" she whispered. Her cheeks flushed crimson when he boldly took her hand and pressed his lips against it, making his request even clearer. The Crimson Dream Butterfly's composure shattered. Outraged, she pulled back and shouted that he was a treacherous disciple, daring to humiliate his own master inside her palace. With fury burning in her eyes, she summoned her sword, warning him that she would sever his tendons and cast him out of Unia Peak that very day. But before she could strike, he released a wave of dark aura that filled the chamber. With a chilling smile, he simply raised a hand to silence her. To her shock, her sword cracked and shattered into pieces. Her body trembled, her knees weakened, and she collapsed to the floor, unable to support herself. Panic washed over her face. What just happened? Why can't I use my cultivation? She thought in disbelief. It was as though her great saint power had been sealed, leaving her no stronger than a mortal woman. The protagonist crouched closer, his smile full of twisted charm, and softly urged her not to resist. Alarmed, the Crimson Dream Butterfly cried out again, calling him a traitorous disciple, demanding to know what he intended to do with his master. Her voice shook with both anger and fear. She could only look up at him in distress as he reached toward her and whispered that she should personally impart her teachings to him. Tears welled in her eyes as she stammered, demanding to know why he was doing this, while lamenting that, for some mysterious reason, her powers were gone, leaving her as helpless as an ordinary human. At that moment, the protagonist leaned closer, a sly smile playing on his lips. Remembering her earlier question of what had he done, he answered calmly, of course he had sealed her cultivation. As his hand firmly gripped the Crimson Dream Butterfly's face, he revealed the truth. On the day when he was hunted by more than a dozen great saints, he had secretly activated a treasure from the system, an item known as the Incarnation Heaven-Weeping Samsara Seal, a divine-grade sealing artifact. It worked silently, embedding a hidden child seal within the body of a designated female cultivator. That seal could then be controlled at any time by the master seal in his possession, instantly cutting off all of her cultivation. He explained coldly that as long as he wielded, any female cultivator beneath the Emperor realm who carried the seal would be forced to obey his commands. The Crimson Dream Butterfly's eyes widened in disbelief. Though she was thousands of years old, her skin flawless and her power unmatched, in this moment she had been rendered utterly powerless. Furious, she retorted that he was being outrageous and asked if he wasn't afraid she would kill him for such disrespect. He only laughed mockingly, taunting her to go ahead and strike him down. "Don't bark if you can't bite," he sneered, leaving her cheeks burning with humiliation. Then his voice grew colder. He asked what she thought would happen if he were to tell the master of Heavenly Sword Peak, Lu, that she had lost her cultivation. After all, years ago, the Crimson Dream Butterfly had slain Lu's father with a single strike. Could Lu truly let go of that blood feud? Horror flickered in her eyes. She shook her head in panic, insisting that such a thing must never happen. If Lu ever found out, she would certainly come for revenge, and Lu was known as a dangerous lunatic. Desperation filled her voice as she promised him anything, treasures of heaven and earth, rare cultivation resources, whatever he wished, she would provide it. But the protagonist's hand pressed her down firmly. With a smirk, he declared that he wasn't interested in any of that. Before he could finish explaining what he truly wanted, she cut him off sharply, her face flushed with anger and fear. She shouted that there was absolutely no way, that he must not even dare. Still trapped under his grip, she struggled fiercely, refusing to submit. "I am a high saint, a master of the holy ground. There is no world where I bow to an ant like you," she spat. The protagonist's expression darkened. He reminded her coldly that he bore no grudge against her or the Tesho holy ground, yet she had persuaded others to unite against him and try to end his life. Now that the tables had turned, he leaned in closer and asked if she finally knew what it meant to feel fear. Then, with a chilling calm, he summoned a mysterious book into his hand. The protagonist revealed that he would hand the book to the Crimson Dream Butterfly, explaining that it contained an ancient cultivation technique which might be especially beneficial to her. When she examined it, her expression shifted in shock. She wondered where this rebellious disciple could have obtained such a profound method. The longer she studied it, the clearer it became. The technique was subtly in harmony with the heavenly Tao itself, something far beyond the ordinary. The protagonist then asked for her opinion, but the Crimson Dream Butterfly only snapped at him to leave. Instead of backing down, he continued to press forward, demanding that she give it to him. Her patience broke, and with gritted teeth, she cursed him as a traitorous disciple. In that tense moment, she faltered slightly, a trace of fluster slipping through her usual calm. The system's cold voice rang out. Notification: host has embraced the role of a rebellious disciple. Recognition granted. Plus 1000 breakthrough points. It even muttered in disbelief, remarking that he was truly walking the path of a villain. As time passed, further notifications echoed. Dual cultivation detected. Injuries fully healed. Cultivation aptitude enhanced. His aptitude surged again and again. The Crimson Dream Butterfly clutched at her robes as the system continued. Plus 100 aptitude? Current heavenly grade aptitude, 317. Cultivation speed increased 20-fold. Step by step, his realm advanced at astonishing speed. From the second layer of foundation establishment, he pushed all the way to the 8th, before finally reaching the 9th layer in just a few hours. The system confirmed his breakthrough, his strength now greater than ever. Satisfied, the protagonist stood and looked down at the exhausted Crimson Dream Butterfly. With a faint smile, he thanked her for the assistance and turned to leave. She, however, gazed at him with a defeated look. Lamenting that she had already given him what he wanted, she asked whether he could undo the seal on her body. The protagonist immediately refused. Her anger boiled over as she demanded if he intended to have her killed, but he only warned her coldly. If she did not wish others to discover that her cultivation was sealed, she should make sure to hide it well. Then, with a wave of his hand, a crystal appeared, faintly glowing in the air. The Crimson Dream Butterfly's eyes widened in shock. She recognized it instantly. It was an image retention crystal. Her face turned pale, and she asked in disbelief whether he had truly recorded an image. Humiliation and fury twisted her expression, but the protagonist only smirked. He told her not to be so worked up, as it was nothing more than a souvenir. With that, he walked away. His parting words cut like a blade. On account of their long acquaintance, he advised her not to waste time trying to undo the seal. Even if you search the entire Tangong continent, he said, no one else but me can release it, unless you somehow find the reincarnation of the Heavenly Emperor himself. He grinned as he spoke, reminding her that the Heavenly Emperor no longer existed in this world. That meant if he were ever to die, she would be forced to live out the rest of her years as nothing more than a mortal, slowly aging until the end of her life. The Crimson Dream Butterfly trembled at those words. The protagonist coldly warned that if she doubted him, she was free to test it for herself. Then he added something even crueler. If he died, the image captured within the crystal would be released, spreading across the Tiankong continent. He asked mockingly, what would people think of her then? The Crimson Dream Butterfly's body shook with anger as she watched him leave through the door. She spat curse after curse, swearing he would not die a good death. Her voice trembled with rage as she cried that it was utterly despicable. How could an insect, one who hadn't even reached the Dao Palace realm, possibly have the ability to seal her powers? Outside the palace, the protagonist lifted his eyes to the sky. He realized that when he had arrived it was early morning, but now the moon had already risen, blanketing the night in silver light. As he descended the steps, he reflected on his gains. Thanks to his master's assistance, he had reached the 9th layer of the Foundation Establishment realm. But he would have to wait until another opportunity before breaking through to the next great stage, the Sea Rotating Realm. He explained inwardly that the Sea Rotating Realm was like gathering water into a great bucket, while the Foundation Establishment Realm was the process of laying down wood to create that bucket. The sturdier the wood, the stronger and more enduring the vessel would be. He admitted his failure in his past life came from impatience. He had skipped properly cultivating his foundation, which left his path unstable and led to ruin. This time, however, he vowed to mold the most solid foundation possible, even if it meant rebuilding from the ground up. With such strength, even if he faced an opponent from a higher boundary, he would not need to fear. His thoughts drifted toward the resources he had hidden away in a canyon many years ago. He wondered whether those Foundation Establishment treasures still remained. But even if they did, there was still the issue of escaping the holy grounds to claim them. Just then, his eyes caught sight of the ancestral borrowing place, the structure where flying boats were stored. His lips curved into a sly grin. Perhaps this was the opportunity he needed. A short while later, a lone flying boat glided over the canyon. The protagonist stood calmly on its deck, arms folded as he controlled the vessel with ease. Guiding it into a shadowy cave, he pressed forward until he reached a rocky area surrounded by water. His eyes sharpened as he gazed into the distance, muttering that the resources he had once hidden here should still be waiting for him. The protagonist landed on the rocky ground and slowly walked toward a massive dark boulder in the middle of the area. Biting his thumb, he used his blood to draw strange patterns across the stone. Suddenly, the air trembled as dust burst out in every direction, and the huge rock began to rise. When the dust settled, a large chest surrounded by several bags was revealed. Our boy's eyes lit up as he realized that the Foundation Establishment resources he had hidden were still intact. Laughing to himself, he muttered that these treasures would have to wait until he grew stronger and fully restored his power. But just as his laughter echoed, a voice cut through the air, calling him trash. Startled, the protagonist turned as several figures appeared above him, riding on a flying boat. One of them sneered, asking who it was down below. They were disciples of Tanjin Peak, and when they got a closer look, one of them shouted in disbelief. He mocked that after 10 days, the so-called useless disciple was not only alive but walking around with energy again. The leader among them, Jiang Mang, smirked and remarked that it seemed Unia Peak's master treated her senior disciple far too well. After all, she had even given him heaven-defying resources to restore his broken cultivation, despite him being nothing more than a waste in their eyes. The protagonist narrowed his eyes and snapped back that Jiang Mang was the very man who humiliated him and destroyed his cultivation 10 days ago. Yet now, that same enemy had the nerve to show up before him. Without hesitation, our boy leapt onto his flying boat. As he passed Jiang Mang, he coldly declared that he would settle this score later. Without even looking back, he boldly announced that 10 days from now, they would face each other in the arena of life and death. Jiang Mang froze for a moment, before asking his companions if he had heard correctly. His two followers burst out laughing. The woman repeated in disbelief that the so-called trash had just challenged Jiang Mang again. The other man sneered and asked if he really thought he could fight their senior in his condition. Jiang Mang then released his skill, the 1,000-mile sound transmission, and proclaimed across the skies that he had spared this disciple's life 10 days ago only for the face of Unia Peak's master. But since the boy was seeking death himself, he would grant him that wish in the arena. Cultivators all around began whispering when they heard the announcement. Some wondered why he dared step into the arena again. Others pointed out that his sea rotation had already been destroyed, questioning how he could possibly challenge Jiang Mang, who was already in the final stage of that realm. A few even smirked, saying that in 10 days they would witness a spectacular show. A short while later, the protagonist returned and parked his flying boat in front of the Crimson Dream Butterfly's residence. Standing at the palace entrance, he looked around and calmly noted that the spiritual energy here was extremely dense. With a faint smile, he decided that this was the perfect place to cultivate for the time being. That night, confident that his master wouldn't mind, the protagonist barged straight into the palace. In his heart, he reasoned that since she belonged to him, everything she owned would one day be his as well. With a proud grin, he stepped inside and greeted the Crimson Dream Butterfly, announcing that her disciple had come to visit again. She looked at him coldly, still calling him her traitorous disciple, and scolded him for arriving at such a late hour. Narrowing her eyes, she asked what exactly he was planning to do. Our boy only smirked and teased her instead, asking what she wanted him to do. Her face flushed as she snapped at him not to try anything outrageous, but he laughed and replied that what he intended was even more outrageous than she could imagine, and asked if she dared to take a look. Before she could respond, he suddenly summoned a stack of glowing talismans. To her surprise, each one lined up in perfect order, flying out the door and spreading across the residence. A huge dome-shaped barrier rose into the sky, surrounding the entire palace. The Crimson Dream Butterfly's eyes widened in shock at his formation technique. She asked if such an arrangement was perhaps a lost art from the ancients. He chuckled, praising her sharp eyes, and asked if she wanted to learn it, and what she could offer in exchange. Flustered, she quickly averted her gaze and insisted she didn't need it. He shrugged and told her that if that were the case, he would just cultivate in peace. Casually pulling a fruit from his bag, he remarked that since she was currently in a mortal body, she might need to eat, and offered it to her. That only made her furious, as she shouted that it was his fault she was in such a state. Glaring at him, she declared that one day she would kill him. But before she could finish, he suddenly slapped her from behind, making her gasp and fall back onto her mattress in embarrassment. With a sly smile, he teased that she was being naughty again, then turned to leave. As he walked away, he casually warned her not to intrude on the rear palace. He had already set up a killing array there, and as her disciple, he still needed her alive to help him cultivate. With a mock-serious tone, he added that if she really died, he would feel very sad. She clenched her teeth and shouted after him that one day she would slice her treacherous disciple into pieces. A short while later, the protagonist sat in the rear palace, calmly reading a book. The system interface appeared before him, describing the Vitality Birth Dao fruit, a rare heaven and earth treasure of the highest grade. When consumed, it granted a cultivator an unshakable foundation. Our boy smiled, thinking about the scripture he practiced, the most powerful foundation-building method ever recorded, one that had reigned supreme since ancient times. Combined with the fruit and the system's support, he wondered who on the entire Tianqiang continent could possibly have a stronger foundation than him. Without hesitation, he picked up the shining fruit and consumed it. Instantly, fiery energy surged through his body, flooding his meridians as if molten flames were coursing through his veins. Sitting cross-legged, he entered deep meditation, activating the Tao scripture as the fruit's power fused with his body. Slowly but surely, he began to rebuild his foundation, layer by layer, stronger than ever before. The system suddenly alerted the protagonist that his cultivation realm was dropping. From the 8th stage, down to the 6th, slipping further to the 3rd, until finally, he fell all the way back to the mortal stage. Startled, our boy opened his eyes sharply, only to hear the system's voice once more, asking if he wished to initiate a breakthrough. Without hesitation, he agreed. The system quickly analyzed his path. Since he was cultivating the ancient Tao scripture of foundation establishment, the most demanding technique of all, the breakthrough cost would be much greater than normal. Each cycle would take one full month, consuming 100 breakthrough points. Thus began his cultivation journey. After consuming the Vitality Birth Tao fruit and channeling the Tao scripture, the system confirmed his progress. In the first month, he advanced into the first layer of foundation establishment. In the second month, he rose to the second layer. Month after month, his power grew steadily, climbing higher without pause. By the 9th month, he had already reached the 9th layer of foundation establishment. While seated in deep meditation, his aura surged violently, shaking the entire palace. When his eyes finally opened, they glowed with dazzling light. With calm confidence, he reflected to himself, people always say that 9 is the ultimate number, and that cultivators should only walk the same path as their predecessors step by step. But that is ignorance. True excellence lies in breaking the rules. To fall and then rise again, within the dangers of life and death, there are risks, but the rewards are far greater. 7 days later, the energy around him erupted once again. The palace was instantly filled with his overwhelming aura as the system announced that the breakthrough was complete. He had successfully shattered the limit and stepped into the 10th layer of foundation establishment. The dark whirlwind created by the protagonist's breakthrough spawned violently at the peak of the mountain, visible even from afar. Meanwhile, on Tianqing Peak, a woman stood inside her elegant pavilion, watching the strange phenomenon unfold. She was Lu, the master of Tianqing Peak, and her expression grew serious. With a sharp gaze, she whispered to herself that such a strong surge of spiritual energy could only mean one thing: perhaps the infamous Crimson Dream Butterfly was about to achieve a breakthrough. Back in the secluded palace, our boy remained in deep meditation. His voice echoed in determination as he admitted that both his body and accumulated spiritual energy had already reached their very limits. Yet, instead of holding back, he declared boldly that he would shatter every boundary and lay down the strongest cultivation foundation from this day forward. In that moment, a powerful aura erupted from his body, shaking the surroundings. The system chimed in, notifying him that he had successfully advanced from the foundation establishment 10th layer peak stage into the Chakra C realm. Excited, the protagonist immediately remarked that since the reward mechanism was triggered so quickly, the system should hurry and reveal what prize awaited him. He leapt into the air and swung his arm with full force, delivering a devastating punch. A grin formed on his face as the system's voice rang out again. It congratulated him on reaching perfection and officially activated the reward mechanism. To his surprise, the system announced that he had obtained something extraordinary: the ancient primordial body. Startled, our boy frowned and demanded to know what this so-called body was, especially since the system mentioned it required an immense amount of resources. Before he could object further, the system calmly explained that the fusion process with the ancient primordial body was already underway. He cursed under his breath, ordering the system to stop immediately, but the reply came too late: the fusion had already been completed. Frustrated, the protagonist clenched his fists and muttered that breaking past the limits of his cultivation was already draining enough. Now, with the ancient primordial body added on top of it, how was he supposed to survive? He roared at the system, demanding answers. The system, however, patiently explained. The ancient primordial body was known as an invincible physique, unmatched in combat power, and once hailed as the strongest combat body of the human race. But there was also a terrifying downside. With the changing laws of heaven and earth in later eras, this body became extremely resource-hungry, making cultivation nearly impossible for most. In short, it was a body of limitless power, but one that demanded a price almost no one could afford. The protagonist soon discovered that the so-called ancient primordial body was nothing but a burden. Useless for cultivation and unbearably resource-hungry, it left him completely dejected. But before despair could take root, the system's cold voice echoed once again. It advised him not to hesitate. If he lacked resources, then he should seize them. If he couldn't challenge the strong, then he should slaughter the weak until no one dared to stand above him. As long as he could convert those stolen resources into billions of breakthrough points, greatness with the ancient primordial body was still possible. Our boy, however, was far from convinced. He muttered that the system was truly skilled at painting rosy dreams, but in reality, no one knew how many breakthrough points he would need for future cultivation. In response, the system calmly displayed his profile data. With a deep breath, the protagonist activated his dust removal technique and whispered to himself that since the fusion was already complete, there was no way back. All he could do was grit his teeth and push forward. A sly grin crept across his face as he added that, fortunately, he still had his mysterious and dangerous master to rely on. Moments later, the heavy mood vanished as he stepped out of the rear palace with a surprisingly cheerful gait. Meanwhile, at the front hall, the Crimson Dream Butterfly lingered gracefully, savoring the fruit he had left behind. Just as she lifted another piece to her lips, a voice interrupted her. "Is it delicious?" the figure asked casually. She nodded without thinking, admitting it was indeed delicious, but her eyes narrowed the moment she recognized who stood before her. Her expression turned sharp and dangerous. It was him. The traitorous disciple. Our boy simply smiled and sat down across from her, greeting her as though nothing had happened. He joked that though only a few days had passed, it felt as though 3 long autumns had gone by. Without warning, he leaned closer and sniffed near her shoulder, then teased her with a smirk, asking just how many days it had been since she last bathed. The Crimson Dream Butterfly's face darkened instantly. Furious, she snapped back that it was entirely his fault. Ever since he forcefully occupied the rear palace, she hadn't even been able to find a proper place to bathe. The protagonist gently reached for the Crimson Dream Butterfly's hand, his voice soft with apology. He admitted it was indeed his fault, and with a mischievous smile, suggested that since things had turned out this way, she should allow him to attend to her bath. Without waiting for her approval, he lightly pulled her along, assuring her not to worry. He promised he wouldn't cross the line. Alarm flashed across her eyes, and she demanded to know what he was planning this time. Yet, moments later, she found herself in the steamy confines of the rear court. The air was thick with mist, and within the chamber, she lay upon the bed, flustered and unsure. The young man pinned her gently, his gaze fixed on her flawless form. He observed with a teasing tone that the so-called heavenly body truly lived up to its name. Even after days without bathing, her skin was still pure, untouched, and radiant like polished white jade. He lowered his head, kissed her hand lightly, and sighed that his own qualifications were far too inferior. With mock humility, he requested permission to at least give her a back massage. The Crimson Dream Butterfly's face burned with embarrassment. All she could do was glare at him, calling him a traitorous disciple. Before the moment could continue, her expression suddenly stiffened. Someone was outside. At the outer hall, a cultivator's voice rang out. It was none other than Tana, the peak master of Tanjing Peak. He called out to her, asking if she had already ended her seclusion. Inside, however, the Crimson Dream Butterfly was still entangled with the protagonist. Flustered, she responded from within the chamber, apologizing to Tana. She claimed she had made mistakes during her cultivation and was unable to meet face-to-face that day. Meanwhile, the system chimed in. It congratulated the protagonist, declaring him the ultimate evildoer. For having another encounter with his master, he had triggered a special reward and obtained the mystical weapon, the Azure Blood Sword. Outside, Tana remained unaware of the truth happening within the chamber. He gently announced that he had brought a specially crafted 7th-grade healing pill, a gift from his junior brother Tan of the Alchemy Cauldron Peak. It was meant to aid her recovery. Inside, the Crimson Dream Butterfly responded faintly, her voice carrying past the barrier, "There's no need. All I require is just a few days of rest." At that moment, the system chimed within Shu's mind, notifying him that through his interaction with the heavenly fragrance body, his cultivation aptitude had increased by 100 points. Meanwhile, Tana continued speaking outside, "All right then, but I bring other news. Your disciple, Chu, has challenged Zhang Meng. I heard your disciple was weak and of low talent. If he loses, our peak's honor will be in jeopardy." Within the chamber, the Crimson Dream Butterfly's expression darkened slightly as she replied with restrained irritation, "I already know, there is no need to explain further. I will think about it myself." In an attempt to ease the atmosphere, Tana raised his flute and began playing a gentle, flowing tune. "This will help you relax," he said kindly. Yet inside, Shu lay beside his master, daring to softly hold her cheek. Exhausted, the Crimson Dream Butterfly weakly whispered, "You, traitorous disciple," she murmured bitterly, "I was speaking to Brother Tana outside, while inside, my own disciple dares to do unthinkable things to me." When Tana finally left, Shu chuckled and casually complimented, "Brother Tana's flute skills are truly impressive." The Crimson Dream Butterfly, however, turned her face away and coldly told him to leave. But Shu ignored her command, smiling instead as he leaned closer. "Since I am already so close to you, Master, surely you don't mind if I take a few treasures from you, right?" In the butterfly's residence, deep within her inner chamber, the Crimson Dream Butterfly sighed helplessly. With no choice, she reluctantly brought forth several treasures and placed them before her disciple. The protagonist's eyes widened. "These are 4th-level elixirs," he exclaimed, "but the 5th-level ones are so few it's pitiful." She quietly replied that this was all she could offer for now. Unless he unsealed her restrictions, she had no way of retrieving the greater treasures locked within her storage ring. Shu glanced at the treasures and remarked that it was fine, even though the 5th-level elixirs were few, there were still 4,000 top-grade spirit stones. That was better than nothing. With a casual smile, he walked away carrying the items, thanking the Crimson Dream Butterfly for her generosity and saying they would meet again soon. Left behind, the Crimson Dream Butterfly sank into troubled thoughts. Perhaps she should beseech the Holy Master, maybe he could lift her seal. But if the seal truly couldn't be undone, and Chu ever felt threatened, he might abandon her and vanish without a trace. Her chest tightened with dread. If that happened, she would be left to live as an ordinary mortal, aging, weakening, and eventually dying. That was not the life she wanted. Her hand slipped into her robes, pulling out a bronze fox mask she had hidden close to her bosom. A glimmer of relief crossed her face. When Chu had unsealed her earlier, she had secretly taken this treasure and concealed it away. Fortunately, he hadn't noticed, otherwise, he would have surely taken it for himself. Holding it carefully, she confessed to herself that while she couldn't restore her cultivation for now, this mask could still conceal her aura. As long as she avoided contact with others, no one would know her cultivation had been sealed, and her enemies wouldn't have the chance to hunt her down. Her mind drifted back to the mask's origins. It had once belonged to the old demon Shu. He had only cultivated for a mere 100 years, yet was already hailed as a primordial sage. She lamented that if only he had chosen the righteous path, he might not have met such a tragic end. With a heavy sigh, she placed the bronze fox mask upon her face. The cold metal hid her beauty, but also granted her safety. She whispered to herself that the past was gone, her old master was long dead. What mattered now was finding a way to free herself from Chu's control. If she failed, she would remain shackled to him for the rest of her life. Meanwhile, in his cave abode, Chu sat with an amused smile tugging at his lips. He had sensed it. His master had finally donned the bronze fox mask. All his effort had not been in vain. He leaned back, chuckling to himself as he imagined how she must look wearing it. As expected, he murmured, "My dear master, without you, there's no way I could continue developing in peace within the Tesho holy ground." If you want to know how our evil protagonist used his master and other to increase his cultivation, don't forget to subscribe and like. And if you're waiting for the next part, just comment part 2 below. Once this hits 100 likes, I'll upload it right away. Until then, enjoy these 4 new manhwas. See you in the next part.